Hola chicos! Today we're going to talk about the excellent poet and very well known here in Granada, Federico García Lorca. Federico was born in Fuentevaqueros, a small town close to Granada, in 1988. He was born the 5th of June and baptized with the name Federico del Sagrado Corazón Jesús García Lorca. His father was Don Federico García Rodríguez, a landowner, and his mother, Doña Vicenta Lorca, was a school teacher that fostered literary taste to his son. Unfortunately, he would die quite early in 1936, being executed. Since he was born in Granada and spent a big amount of his life in the city, there is a big impact in our city. Like, for example, the park Federico García Lorca that probably most of you will have been in, the house that you can find there, some of the most important elements in that house, and there is also a museum theater that you can see on the left. The view from the museum is what you see there, the cathedral, so that you can have an idea where you can find it. And inside the museum, as you can see at the bottom, there is a theater. There is also a small town called Valderrubio, that is the place where Federico García Lorca lived for a short while. You can see the house that is being turned into a museum. It's very well kept, as you can see. And that's Federico on the front line, bottom, with a dark vest when he went to school there. Federico was always a very peculiar boy, very different from the rest. Apparently, from the age of 2, he started to show his ability to learn popular songs. Also, he would stage miniature religious services. However, his health was quite fragile, and apparently he did not begin to walk up until he was 4 years old. Okay? So the family moved to Granada in 1908, where he did middle and high school. And as a student, he was quite lousy, leaving the faculty of Granada to settle in the Madrid student residence from those years, 1916 to 1923. And he eventually graduated in the University of Granada quite smoothly as a lawyer in 1923. So it took him a while to get his graduation. During his youth, and the first works that he published are Impresiones y Paisajes, which is impressions and landscape, but I think the translation, the official translation for this book in English is Sketches of Spain. That was the first book he published, and it was financed by his father. Around 1919, he moves to Madrid, as we said, and he started to meet different writers like Juan Ramón Jiménez, with whom he became very good friends. You can see him on the picture with a beard, and also poet Pablo Neruda. In 1920, his work, The Spell of the Butterfly, premiered at the theater with not a lot of success. It was quite a weird type of play, so people, I guess, were not ready for it. Then he published his book of poems in 1921 and 1923, and he put on stage a comedy of puppets called The Girl That Irrigated the Basil and the Nosy Prince. As you can guess from the title, it's no common type of play, so again, not very successful. In 1923, he meets Dali, and that meant a great influence, not only for his work, but also for his life. And the two of them forged a great relationship, friendship. During that time, he also published the literary magazine Rooster, Gallo, and unfortunately it only left 2 numbers. You can see one of the covers and then some of the writings that Federico García Lorca did together with some drawings that were very common in his books. Then, from this time period, he based his writings he found his inspiration from the traditions of folk and gypsy music of his native Andalusia, especially in Sagramonte. If you remember, it's the part where all the gypsies used to live in caves, and he felt connected with them because they were considered outsiders, they were considered different, and he always felt he was different from the rest. Okay. He also used old ballads and mythology to express his mostly tragic vision of life, but in general his personal vision of life. After this, he decided, a little bit convinced by his family, he decided to move to New York. And by this time he had published his books Canciones in 1927 and Primer Romancero Gitano 1928. And this is a poetic work that was more accessible and more popular to the public. From this trip to New York, we have the book called Poet in New York, Poeta en Nueva York. And it was a more rewarding time for the poet. However, he did not learn a word of English, and he did not like New York. He was quite disappointed with it. He thought it was going to be very different from what he had in Spain. And it was different, but not the different that he expected. Okay? About the passport that you have on top right, I wanted to show you that if you look at the right-hand side, it shows Federico's picture, but then you have right next to it the word esposa, wife. And that shows that women were not allowed to travel if it was not with a male family member or your husband. While he was in New York, he decided to go to Havana, and it's where he wrote part of his works called Así que pasen 5 años and El Público. And after this New York trip and his short visit to Cuba and everything, García Lorca returned to Spain around 1931. And it was a time where his very popular farce, La Zapatera Prodigiosa, the prodigious shoemaker, was staged. He also wrote and produced a series of often experimental and controversial theatrical productions that, again, were not very well received. And from this same period, we also have the Zapatera Prodigiosa, but also the play based in the historical romantic character called Mariana Pineda. And the scenery of this play was produced by Salvador Dalí. In 1931, what happened? The Second Spanish Republic was established, and then García Lorca became the co-director of the state theater company called La Barraca. He enjoyed all of it, all the resources for producing, directing, writing, adapting all kind of plays. And also around this time, he also wrote the work Doña Rosita the Spinster, that tells the story about this girl that is always waiting for his fiancé to come and marry her, and unfortunately that never happens. One of the key works in Lorca's production is this so-called rural trilogy that he wrote during this period. We have Blood Wedding, Yerma, and then it is completed by another work called, that we are going to talk of, The House of Bernarda Alba. The three of them are about the life, the love, and the tragedy of rural Spain. Let's start with the first one, Blood Wedding. And it's the first part of the trilogy. It was written and performed in 1933. And it's about the concerns of a woman who, on the day of the wedding, runs off with a former sweetheart. This story is actually inspired on true events. We have on the left Casimiro, the groom, Paca, the bride, and Curro, the beloved, with whom Paca runs, that it's not in the picture. But we have on the right, we have Jose, the one that shot Curro, and Carmen, Paca's sister, that was the one that warned everyone that the two of them were running off from the wedding. This story all happened in Níjar, Almería, and as you can see from the headlines, they all blame the woman. Las veleidades de una mujer. It's all a woman's fault. Okay? This is one of the latest picture, one of the rare picture of Paca, the bride, and she was forced to wear black as a sign of mourning for the rest of her life. Well, the second part was Yerma. Yerma, it's this story that portrayed the deadly conflict in a barren marriage, and the heroine strangles Juan, her husband, because he does not understand her yearning to love and bear children. And then the one we are going to study more in detail, The House of Bernarda Alba, that was written just before Federico García Lorca's death in 1936, and it was published sometime afterwards in 1945, that depicted this tyrannical mother, Bernarda, and the life of her daughters in the house. In the end, spoiler alert, the youngest commits suicide over Pepe el Romano. Okay? We will talk more in detail about this one later on. But then around that time, Federico García Lorca decided, instead of exiling, he was offered exile in Colombia and Mexico. He decided to stay here. So he returned to his home in the gardens of San Vicente in Granada, which is Federico García Lorca's park now. And in August 1936, just 1 month after the Civil War broke out, a bunch of officers surrounded the house where Federico García Lorca was staying, and his friends tried to intervene so that he was not taken. But García Lorca was arrested and taken by car to an uncertain area, along with other detainees. And apparently he was then executed there and buried in a mass burial in that location that is, to this point, unknown. His niece, Laura García Lorca, continues to maintain the legacy with the Federico García Lorca Institution. That's her, and she's half Spanish, half American. And the work of Federico García Lorca is quite peculiar. And let's start with the symbols. We have some central symbols in his works. To start with, the moon, one of the most common symbols in Lorca. And the most common meaning is that of death, but it's also connected to eroticism, fertility or infertility, and beauty. With water, when it's running, it's a symbol of vitality, but when it's stagnant, it's representing, again, death. Blood can also represent life, but then when it's spilled, obviously it's death. Surprise! Then the horse and its rider. Again, death, of course. Herbs, guess what? Yes, a symbol of death. And finally, metal, which is again another symbol for death. We can see all those symbols represented in this poem, Sonnambule Ballad, that it's a really beautiful poem that tells the story about these two lovers. You can read it more in detail in CNM Virtual. And then Federico Garcia Lorca also wrote this Llanto for Ignacio Sánchez Mejías, Lament for Ignacio Sánchez Mejías, and it's considered one of the best elegies of Spanish literature of all times, and it's one of Lorca's last poems. Ignacio Sánchez Mejías was a famous bullfighter at the time, and he wrote this poem when he knew of his friend's death in the bull ring. The two of them met on one occasion in Sevilla, and ever since then they became really good friends. And Sánchez Mejías, the bullfighter, was very attached to the generation of 27 to which Garcia Lorca belonged. And in addition to being a bullfighter, he was a patron, a writer, a playwright, a lecturer, a president of the Sevilla Red Cross, president of the Betis Football Club. So he was quite into the intellectual circles. And for the poets and the writers, he meant the fascination for bullfighting, and it was seen as a vehicle for artistic expression. You have an example of this beautiful poem handwritten by Federico, and it's divided into 4 different parts: cogida and death. Cogida means when the bulls gets you. Then the spilled blood. And number 3 would be the laid out body, and then absent soul. Apart from these 2 poems, again, we are going to focus on this work, Bernarda Alba. You have the synopsis there, but if you have read the story, you know what it's about. And then the characters. The most important one being Bernarda, the mother, who is around 60, and then he has 5 different daughters. Angustias, the ones that is supposed to get married, she's 39, and then the youngest, who is 20. By that time, being 20 and not being married was almost a little bit too old. You were supposed to get married quite early. Okay. Then we have Pepe Romano, who is the only man in the play, and he's quite often mentioned but never appears on stage. Then La Poncia, you can see her on the left hand side. She's a maid and she's been serving Bernarda forever. Josefa, that it's not in the picture, who is the grandmother, and she plays also a key role. And then another maid who is 50, and you will see why she's important to the play when you read it. We have some pictures here. As you can see, it's all like quite somber type of character, situation, scenes. And we will talk a little bit about this play. And some of the discussion topics will be some of the main and secondary themes in the work, the rivalry between the sisters, and the idea of vitality and repression in them, the house seen as a convent, or maybe almost as a prison, the relationship between Poncia and Bernarda, the role of Pepe el Romano in this work, and how is this work connected to the other 2 parts of the trilogy, Blood Wedding and Yerma. You will have to do some research for that, okay? And as for me, that's all. So I only have left to say thank you to every one of you.